So my name is Andrey Petrov, and I'm Associate Professor of Geography and Director of the Arctic Center at the University of Northern Iowa in the United States.
Thanks, Dr. Petrov. It's great that you've given us some time for our course today. We're all aware of the research you've been doing around Canada and the north of Russia on knowledge economies and the changing economies of the north, and also looking at demographic change in the north of these areas. Perhaps you could start by telling us about what you think some of the major demographic changes have been in northern parts of Russia in the past few decades, perhaps.
That's a very interesting question. And the main change in population in the Arctic Russia was a decline. It's rapid decline since the early 1990s, right? So the population of the Soviet Russia at the time reached its maximum in 1989, which was quite large, actually. If you take all regions that Russia considers northern regions, at that time it was probably about 12 million people lived there. And then I guess about 30% of them left since. And especially in very remote areas where some regions lost about 50% of population. So, but when we talk about population in the Arctic, especially in the Russian Arctic, we need to understand there are two populations there, right? So one is the Russian population, or it's the in-migrant population that came there during the Soviet time for the most part, because the Soviet Union and Russian Federation has been exercising policy of settling the Arctic, and in Soviet terms, actually, development was kind of equated to settling. So it was really a drive to put people, build cities in the Arctic. And the other population, of course, is indigenous population. So there's about, at this time, about 200,000 indigenous people living in the Arctic. They represent roughly 40 different groups. And their population dynamic is quite different from the Russian population dynamic. So on the Russian side, in terms of natural dynamics, it's very similar to the rest of Russia. I mean, it's a little younger population, a little more male population. However, actually, we have to say that given that Russia is very women-dominated society, actually, the even Arctic population of Russians is less male as it would be in Northern Australia, for example, or in Canada. But still, yes, we see that definitely. The reasons are very similar as well. It's, of course, in-migration of male population, male jobs. It's also just younger cohorts, of course, since Rubinstein told us that, males are more likely to move longer distances. That's all prevalent there, of course. But lately, the pattern was changing since there is large out-migration. Out-migration happened because of the big bust that Russian Arctic experienced since this collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Simply put, the economic policies and subsidies and other things that were given to the people to remain in the Arctic just vanished, and so the resource activity all kind of diminished, and at the same time changed their nature a little bit, because of course there is more fly in, fly out now than it was in the past, since there is no policy of settling. So these people basically had nothing else to do there, so they moved to other areas, especially those who came there in the 70s and 80s, who were still having strong links with areas back in the mainland Russia. That's how we call it, the mainland Russia. So that was, as I said, some regions lost 50% of the population. And that's, of course, abandoned communities are all there. The difference, of course, is that they probably not observed it much because it's so remote area, because nobody even goes there, but they are there, they're sitting there, they're all intact places. Of course, it's an area of permafrost, so they're quickly deteriorating. But in any case, so that's the situation there. And in terms of indigenous population, what happened, it's very interesting as well, because yes, just like in Northern Australia and Canada, Alaska, the indigenous populations have higher fertility rates, and they have fairly high mortality rates as well. But what happened in the 90s is very interesting, because if you look at the surface, or if you look at the basic data like birth rate versus death rate, the indigenous population in Russia experienced a very rapid demographic transition, so to speak, right? So the fertility fell probably 3 times, mortality was kind of steady or going in and up and down. It's still lower than before, but they really quickly changed. And the argument traditionally, well, I guess the socioeconomic conditions improved, but they did not. So really, it's the change because of the problem rather than because of socioeconomic progression, like you expect from demographic transitions theory. So we really have a very, very strange situation. If you look at the structure of mortality, for example, it's very, very much non-transitional mortality. It's a pre-transitional mortality patterns, right? So it's a lot of external causes of death. It's younger death. Life expectancy for indigenous people in Arctic Russia is at least at least 10 years below their counterparts, their Russian counterparts in those regions, and probably up to 20 years below the rest of Russia. So we're talking about male life expectancies in the neighborhood of 50 years. So 50 years also male, and female, say 50, 56, 57, maybe 60. Very low, right? So Russia itself has 72 for women and about 60-ish for men, which is actually pretty bad too. But the structure of that, and of course the high mortality rate in mid-age, right? So Russia in general, including Arctic, including indigenous people, have very high mortality between ages of 45 and 55. That's the main male mortality, and of course it's related to lifestyle, right? Alcohol consumption, smoking, and other things that are prevalent in the northern communities, even more than they are in the rest of Russia. So that kind of warrants a question: what happened? And then there is no easy answer, I guess. But one of them is very interesting, and I was trying to kind of pursue that argument, is that it's an existential change. An existential change related to several things, but one of them is that Soviet Union, you could blame it for a lot of things, but Soviet Union was kind of keeping a more or less traditional economy intact. And traditional economy in Arctic Russia is very different from Australia. Because a lot of this population engaged in reindeer herding. So it's agriculture activity when you actually herd the reindeer, right? It's not just hunting or fishing or something like that, which is also present, but this is also sort of activity that was supported by the Soviet Union, was subsidized. So that kind of kept a little bit intact families first. So basically, it's a nomadic activity. So and what happened in the Soviet times, you could take your wife and family with you. You go with your herd, and your wife gets money for that. She actually employed by the state enterprise. So when things started to change, when all this subsidies disappeared, kind of what happened is that men would go by themselves, and women will increasingly stay in villages and settlements. Right, so women started to pursue different career and doing different things, while men still are attached to the traditional activity, which could be good. But the problem is that actually demographically, you can even probably see already that it's some kind of mismatch right there, right? And so it exacerbates, I think, the crisis of families and the crisis of man. And like in many other northern regions, man is a kind of in trouble, right? And in terms of education, in terms of life expectancy, in terms of a variety of things. So that's part of this existential crisis that we observe. And we have to remember that out of the 44 groups, or 40-some groups that we have, indigenous groups, some of them are really tiny. We talk about 2,000 people, 500 people even, right? So, and they are disappearing. And that's of course an interesting twist to the story. But in general, Russian Arctic kind of rebounded a little bit in the last few years, like the last decade. Not anywhere to the extent it was before, but basically the migration slowed down. The out-migration of Russians slowed down. Well, first of all, because most people who wanted to leave, they did. But then, of course, there is more opportunities right now than it was before. And but as I said, the fly-in, fly-out has replaced this settlement way of developing Russian Arctic resources. While indigenous people, of course, in the situation with indigenous people in Russia, it varies really drastically from really well-off oil regions and natural gas regions that actually could help indigenous communities kind of run their economy and provide various incentives and subsidies and things like that to regions that have absolutely nothing, where traditional, or at least the non-subsistence part of traditional activities that could be sold, for example, reindeer herding, is gone essentially, and they are in a very different situation. So it's a mixed bag, but overall, of course, it's very concerning, and not to say that we still observing the demographic change in this within the indigenous population that I'm not sure where it's going, because we did not decrease mortality, but we decreased fertility. So, and that of course goes to population decline eventually.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thanks for your insights there. Perhaps one more insight, if you could, from maybe drawing from your work in Canada. Perhaps you could sort of tell us what you think are the major future challenges for settlements and communities in remote places in Canada.
Future challenges?
Future challenges.
Well, I mean, of course, in Canada, the structure of settlement is different than would be in Russia, right? So they're much smaller settlements, and again, but still, actually, it would be two types of things. It would be the towns that are populated by non-Indigenous Canadians. I mean, like Whitehorse would be a good example, Yellowknife, right? And there is a really large number of small communities that are largely Indigenous, Inuit for the most part, but there are other groups, First Nations, right? Well, I mean, there are various challenges. Actually, some of them relate to economy, some of them not relate to economy. I think the most kind of screaming problem in Canadian and or Alaskan, actually Russian communities, that we have to remember, most of them are coastal communities, right? And because they're coastal communities, they are most affected by even small changes in environment, right? So it's a permafrost, it's coast, and it's no ice. So three things that come together, and they really, first the physical wash away. I mean, Shishmaryov maybe you have heard, right? As the Alaskan community is being washed away, but I mean, you don't need to go farther than Tuk and Northwest Territories. It's also washed away. I mean, we don't talk about it as much, but it's been washed away since the last 20 years, right? So that's an existential threat in a way. And we need to understand that while most of the settlement pattern, of course, emerged in the last 50, 60 years in terms of these communities, they typically emerged at the places where, more or less, it was good places for people to live and use the sea resources. Right, so it's not by accident that some of these communities appear where they are. So when you say, "Oh, let's resettle people somewhere," it's not very easy, because it's actually there is a reason why this community exists. So if you put them inland, they can't access sea for sea hunting, for seal hunting, for whaling. If you put them in some other shore location, you eventually actually get the same problem as you get now. So that's one of the challenges. Now, of course, there is an economic challenge. An economic challenge is that we see the concentration of population, right, from small communities to mid-sized or larger communities, right? I mean, that's related to jobs for the most part. But I mean, there are other things. There are other things that pursuit of education, for example, that kind of work against the small communities. I mean, they're still viable in many ways because there's high natural rates of, high natural growth, so that keeps them going. But the outmigration is prevalent, not everywhere, in many of them. I mean, the communities benefit the most are the regional capitals, Whitehorse, Yellowknife, Iqaluit, and then some regional centers, right? So it's kind of in between, like Inuvik, for example. But the rest is sort of really, facing kind of double challenge, I guess, because most of them are coastal, most of them are really small, and they have very limited, opportunities for employment and pursuit of education. And of course, these are something that is, being addressed by going somewhere, and that includes, of course, the brain drain, because you lose young people, then you're not going to be a viable community in the future. So these are some of the challenges that we see in the Canadian North, which are not as different, I guess, in other circumstances. Maybe, of course, I guess in Australia as well, you will have sea level rise, maybe, as an important other environmental changes.
Well, Dr. Petrov, thank you on behalf of myself and my students for your time this afternoon. Thank you.